Welcome to the Learning Reinvented Podcast, brought to you by myself, Katie Godden.
And James Politillo from Learning Effect. There are lots of learning podcasts out there, so we wanted to do something slightly different. In this episode, we'll be focusing in on the role of first jobs in setting out a career and expectations for what people want from work. So, Katie, in terms of first jobs, let's start with why we think they're so important and the role they do play in for individuals and also organisations.
I think for the individual, it helps that transition from kind of school or education into the workplace. And obviously if you do that job earlier on, so like kind of 16, 17, that while you maybe still be in education, that also helps a lot as well, because there is a big difference between that kind of education setting to then going into the workplace and understanding how people work, the skills that you can pick up as well, getting used to talking to different levels of people, etc. I think that's really crucial. Obviously for the workplace, it's you need to have different demographics in your workplace to get that different mix of people. I think that's really crucial. I think if you just had one demographic of people, then everything's going to become quite stagnant. What are your thoughts?
I think just picking up on something you said there about the different demographics, I think that first job is seminal for people in terms of setting out a work ethic, being structured, taking responsibility, understanding customers, understanding nuance, working with maybe a more diverse set of people than you've been to school with or associated growing up. So I think it helps break down lots of barriers. And one thing I think is really important that you mentioned there is that sort of having a diverse or mixed team. Um, One of the things I've seen recently is having a small child. I took him to Flip Out, which if you've never been to Flip Out, don't go. It's horrible, it's particularly in the hot British weather. But it was
Oh
like being
gosh.
in a big metal tin can with lots of kids running and jumping on trampolines and various other things they can climb and different activities. But one of the things that struck me, because I was in there for 2.5 hours and just watching what was going on, was looking at the team working there and how they were quite obviously early on in their career, lots of young people working, but there was no role modeling and the service levels were pretty poor and it didn't seem designed around the customer. So I think regardless of it being your first job, I think it's about having a good first job and a good first job experience because those habits can become ingrained. So looking there, customer indifference, people pushing past customers because they wanted a drink rather than serving the customers or letting them go first, barging past people on the stairs because they were in the middle of doing their job, not understanding the customers in your space. So just some real basics missing. And I didn't see any obvious leadership or management presence. And I started looking for it because I'm me. I was just interested in the people watching and what was going on in the space. But it really struck to me how important that setting those expectations, because it's very easy in that first job to go, well, that's what work is about. I just go in, do what I need to do, get what I want out of it, and then go away. So I think it's about having that experience, but also having a good experience and having a good structure around it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where the diverse workforce comes from, and that different age group as well and experience. But like you said, you need to be in the right setting and you need to have the right people around you in order to be able to kind of learn from them as well. Because if you've got people that are perhaps in high positions that are doing the same thing as you, you're learning by example, aren't you? So you're never obviously gonna change. And like you said, that's going to be ingrained in how you go into work, and hard habits to then kick. Um, so yeah, that's really crucial. And having that first job, what do you think the best first job would look like?
Um, I go back to, I mean, almost talking about my first job. So I had a weird set of first jobs. So you talked about taking a job at 16, 17. I didn't actually have my first job till I was 18 because I'm old enough that there was no Sunday working really before I was 18. That only came in just after I was 18. I played a lot of sports, so I couldn't get a Saturday job, and there weren't really any evening jobs because I sort of commuted to school and stuff, and there wasn't really anything I could pick up before that. So I'd done, bits of entrepreneurial car cleaning and things like that, but I hadn't had a job. So I finished my A level and it was just like, right, I've got a summer. Lots of people go away. I worked and I did loads of different jobs, and they were actually all really impactful. Some of them from learning what I did or didn't like. So, one of the jobs was going off onto a farm and picking and packing vegetables, and I can't say I particularly enjoyed that. And again, the working environment was very much like you weren't treated with respect, and you were just driven to do what you do, and you just turned up and you were a number. And I so that's like that's not somewhere I enjoyed spending my time. I mean, I didn't do that many shifts. Then I had another job which was warehouse stroke retail, and I really liked that because it was energetic, it was fast paced, there was a clear goal and drive. So it wasn't the sort of retail where you were just stood around doing nothing. It really was people coming through the door every day, dealing with the delivery that come in and sorting it out for the week. So there was set of responsibility, there was a system, there was working as a team, there was understanding customers. So I think again for the right person, because you could have thrown some people into that role and they'd flounder because they wouldn't have had that support. But for me, that worked. And then my other first job at that time was I then worked as a steward, and I was working at football and various pop events, and that was great just for meeting people, building confidence, dealing with conflict, de-escalation. So for me, I learned lots of different skills in the series of different jobs over a summer. And I also worked in a warehouse doing sort of sorting and distribution stuff. So I love that because you could turn your brain off. It was a different type of job, but you could see what you could achieve. So I think there is no probably right first job, but I would say being in an environment that's right for you, having the level of support and guidance, and autonomy and support in whatever that happens to be, whether that's a set of rules around where you're working and clear guidance and training support if you need it, if you're a bit more independent, or good training and induction and support and mentoring and coaching if you so again it's that adaptation to the individual. And I could have seen lots of other people go into any of those four jobs and not survive or not cope if they hadn't have had that same attitude. So they helped me understand what I could offer, but also understand what my strengths were. And so I think something that helps build that individual. Very long answer, but what about you? What was your first job?
My first official job was working in a supermarket when I was 16. Um, and although I then went on to work in retail after that, but from a different kind of in a different area, working on the tills for sort of 8 hours on a Saturday was not something that I particularly enjoyed, because I was stuck behind the till. I didn't mind I did the occasional shift of stacking shelves. I didn't mind doing that because I could move around a bit more. But equally, it still, gave me the opportunity to speak to members of the public, build that confidence in doing that. Because I think at 16, as much as you still might be confident as a teenager, you're not used to kind of interacting on different levels as much. So, it helped broaden my skill set and equally, like you said, realize what I did and didn't want to do. Um, and then go forward into kind of jobs that I was more suited to. Um, but yeah, I don't think there, like you said, I don't think there's one perfect first job. I think if you're doing something that was particularly remote, and the skill sets that you were gaining were kind of minimal, then perhaps that wouldn't be the best. But yeah, I don't think there's one good or bad one.
And for me, a lot of the traditional first jobs are evolving or changing. So, we see the change in the high street, change in retail, but then there's more entertainment venues or hospitality. So there's lots of different jobs that are entry level jobs because they're maybe not the best pay, They don't require a lot of skills. They're maybe not as desirable to people doing, but people can go in and get that experience in those jobs. And also, they are sometimes the roles that have the flexibility of hours that can suit that first job, either whilst you're at school or college or university or just out into work for the first time. So there is some change in those type of environments. So it might be there's now more people in sort of pick and packing and deliveries and different areas. Again, depending on where you are in the country, in the world, there will be different types of industries available to you. And I think it's for those people to just step in and take that opportunity, because if you don't, when you get to the end of whatever your education looks like and you're looking for a first full-time job, you probably don't really understand, as you said at the beginning, that bridge between education and work, and maybe your alignment is not quite as it should be to the expectations of roles, and your work ethic might be slightly different. So I would strongly encourage people to try and get into something that has a team environment of whatever sort they can. And there will be people saying, I'm not really that team player and I don't really want to be in the team environment. But the reality is, we're all in teams of some sort in our careers. So I think the earlier you get into a team environment and start understanding that work ethic and the dynamics is really important. But then from the other side, that role needs to have the right support and guidance and training as well into that role.
Do you think organizations that perhaps don't have the right support and training for these entry level jobs tend to do worse? So like the example that you gave at the very beginning of this, what's it called? Flip out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do you think places like that tend to survive longer or less because they're not providing the right training support, standards, etc., for their entry level staff?
Just purely as a customer view on that one experience, it's something that kids like because they don't really spot the nuance, but the kid isn't the customer. The parent is the customer who's deciding to host a birthday party there, or take a couple of children there and have to supervise in that experience. And to me, the whole business model is not geared around the customer. Therefore, they probably don't really care about training their staff in that way. So, to that's setting an interesting perspective on your first work experience, because if that's the culture you're born into, then I don't think you're going to get top talent who are all the top talent in there are going to feel frustrated because they want to help the customers. They're going to feel some of the practices which I felt as a customer are slightly disingenuous. That we're talking about healthy eating, they're selling bottomless slushies. So there's all
Mm.
sorts of things around the business model which I think aligned with what I saw in the staffing. So I think it was quite congruent as to how they treat their customers, probably how they treat their staff. There was someone making a complaint in the food service area. I use food in the loosest sense of the term, but in the food service area. And again, the supervisor who came across was very young. I'm not sure what training they'd had in de-escalation or support, or watching just how the kitchen team were then responding whilst that complaint was there, rather than then deal with the next customer or that person get taken away and deal with the queue. They all disappeared, I think, because they didn't like the conflict. So again, I could see just things playing out which maybe could have been handled better with some more training, guidance, mentoring, coaching, feedback. But ultimately focus in the business on creating those experiences. And if they're not role model, they don't come naturally to lots of people, because they may not even have experienced those from a customer end to know what good looks like. So how are they going to provide that level of service?
That's it. I think at that sort of age, or when you're a lot younger, you're not experienced in kind of life in general. So you don't know how you deal with it as a customer, let alone how you potentially deal with that as the member of staff. So yeah, that's a difficult bit. And I bet retention of staff is obviously something that's probably quite difficult and probably high turnover. Like if you said if you're getting people in there that are actually really good and can see the mistakes easily, then they're probably the ones that are going to go elsewhere and find something else.
I think that's often the case throughout a work culture that you sometimes keep the not best staff if you haven't got the best culture, because those who are good can see that there's something better they could possibly be doing with their time.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I think there's lots of things to take from first jobs, and I think they are critically important in our environment. I think they're a critical part of people's life journey. But we're also seeing a change in what people see as their first job as well. So, people think that they can suddenly, because there is more opportunity than maybe there was in the past, they can become their own boss earlier. They can become more entrepreneurial. They can become a creator, an influencer, which again has lots of good work ethic behind it if you're doing it well and you're learning and you're putting into practice and you're testing and learning. So there is not necessarily a blueprint of what a first job is, because it could just be like I did, setting up a car wash for cleaning your neighbour's cars when you're a kid. And some people experiment with that type of thing, other people won't. Um, but back to that first job, I think it's really important that organisations think about how they help people on that step, not just for the immediate benefit to their business of they're paying wages to someone and they're helping to deliver something, but also that more altruistic thing of setting the societal expectations and helping people take that positive step into work. What do you think? Because I know you've been involved in sort of roles where you've helped mentor new people or being the most senior people around lots of younger people in the workplace. What do you think should be put in place by organisations to help bridge that transition?
I don't know, because I was just thinking about it when you were talking then as well. I think from a learning and development point of view, it's changed because we've got like different technologies in workplaces. There's sometimes less communication because you've got this different technology, because it kind of takes away the need to have conversations. So people are a bit more self-sufficient. But does that then take away some of the skill sets that you've perhaps, acquired because you've had to have that human interaction in the past? I think it's really good to just have the good process and still keep up with that good communication with new people. And if you're mentoring anyone, I think that's still the crucial line that you need to go down, and help support and adapt to whatever's changing in the workplace as well. And just set best practice and lead by example. I think they're all things that people should be doing anyway, and hopefully did in the past. But I think that's something that needs to be continued. But it just might look slightly different. You might have different means of communication, etc.
I think roles evolve and reshape all the time, and we're maybe not the best at signaling to people what their role has become as technology comes into it. So, for example, if you're in a hospitality or restaurant environment, you might now have QR codes, order at table. So your interaction as a staff member may be very different to what it was before. So people are not coming to a bar, or there's no table service in the same way that someone was taking your order. Someone might walk into a restaurant, get shown to a table, shown the app, asked if they've understood and been here before, and then it's left to them. And the next thing they do is get their food delivered. And so there's maybe different interactions all the way through that. But the skills and awareness maybe people need is I need to be looking over who's unhappy, who's waited too long, how can I keep them engaged, how can I check in with people. So I think the skills are still required there, but sometimes you see those bits missing because maybe it's not been trained in, or
Yeah,
maybe it's not natural into that environment.
that's it. And it's the same in a supermarket. If I go back to when I started when I was 16, that's 20 years ago. Um, but there was a huge long line of people on tills. So like all of the, like when you go to the supermarket now, it's kind of one or two. Back then on a Saturday, it was nearly all of them. So that's like 20 odd tills that were full of people. Whereas now, even on a Saturday, if you go in, it's not that, because you've got this advancement in technology which allows people to do self-service, etc., etc. So, I think that has all changed those bits, and people, like I said, don't have to have that. But like you said, it's really crucial to be able to pick that up. But is it as easy to be able to do that when you're not following the whole journey, if that makes sense? Because you're not having that initial interaction, you're not having that continued interaction necessarily. And would it be your first port of call to do it? Or like you said, um, if you're in hospitality and someone's ordered on a QR code or via a website and you're just kind of putting it on a table, is it easier just to dump things down rather than kind of being a bit more polite about it? Probably. But I think this is where learning and development comes into it and plays a really big part in everything that's changing, and we need to adapt to things, but we need to ensure that people are still having that awareness. It's probably more crucial now than it was then as well.
Absolutely. And you're just talking about supermarkets. This is one of the things I see every time I go into a supermarket, a large format one. You've got lots of self-service tills now. You've got maybe one or two places where you can go and have that traditional checkout experience and you go through. And then across those self-service tills, you'll find they're closed off because of they've got lower staffing, or there's areas that one person is covering the approvals for 20 or 30 tills. And it doesn't feel very customer service to me often in some of the places I go. And the people who are serving are in no rush. Yet people going in there are generally in a rush. And I can understand that from the individual's point of view, because they're having to cope with 30 people and they're not going to be as mad as I was in my first job, running around trying to make sure everything was done as quickly as possible. But organizationally, just through the design and everything else, we're saying to them, the customer maybe isn't as important as I would have viewed them as. And we've done that because we'd have more staff on
Yeah.
if we cared about the customer, if we wanted to make that experience frictionless. But we don't. We create friction in that process, and we try and remove the staff from it and automate it and pass a lot of the work back to customers. So rather than you learning to interact with people in a positive way, so you're dealing with lots of different people coming through and you're on a checkout, all your interactions are where someone's got a point of friction. So it's a different type of interaction, because you're only going across because they need approval on alcohol, or something hasn't scanned, or something hasn't weighed properly, or whatever it happens to be. But they're all one type of very transactional interaction where someone just wants you to do something and go away. And it does create a different type of learning, a different type of experience, and a different type of skill set that, again, I don't see a lot of younger people in those type of roles. It tends to be older people, I think, because there's more conflict. So that removes another layer of those interactions. I see more young people being given a trolley to run around and just pick off the shelves. So they're not learning the interaction. They're more in the back of house type of area. But it's just interesting to look at how that workplace evolving and where people are going to pick up those rounded skills.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear what our listeners think about that as well, and what they've seen, and perhaps how they handle that in regards to not just learning and development, but in general, having entry level staff. Are they younger? Have you got a mix of demographics, and what are the changes and adaptations that they've had to make over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to hear your stories, either as we've shared of your first jobs and what that taught you and what was seminal, were the things you liked, didn't like, or how you're then seeing that play out now in terms of the first jobs of maybe of your children, how they differ to yours. And then as a person in a workplace or employer, what does that play out for you, and what are you doing to help people on that journey?
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Learning Reinvented podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you've not already done so, please follow our podcast. And if the learning effect can help you and your organisation, please do get in touch. You can find both James and Katie on LinkedIn, and our contact details are in the show notes below.